So now our next speaker is Tom Demeranville. He's working as a software engineer at the British Library, and is more specifically working as the technical lead for the Odin project. And today he's going to speak about ORCiD, so how to integrate ORCiD.
Hi everyone. As I've just been introduced, my name is Tom. I'm working at the British Library. And I'm going to talk to you today about integrating ORCiD. I'm also going to talk about the more general author identifier landscape, how that pans out, the complexity of author identifiers in the wild as we see them at the moment. I'm going to talk about research objects, how we identify those, and how we can link the two things up. Now, I work on the Odin project, which is a European project. We're a year and a half into a 2-year project now. It's concerned mainly with linking authors with research outputs, but not just authors. We're looking at things like data librarians, data curators, and we're linking not just things like journal articles. We're specifically looking at data sets, grey literature, things like that. So Odin stands for the ORCiD Data Site Interoperability Network. So it sort of presupposes the solution there in ORCiD and DataSite, but I'll go through the reasons why as we go along. A quick note about who we're working with, just to paint a wider picture. It's actually an international project, so we're working with CERN and getting their input. They've got an awful lot of data, as you can imagine. We're working with longitudinal studies, so that's in the UK. We're working with the National Survey of Health and Development, UK Data Service. We're working with Dryad, which you probably are aware of, which is a data repository, and the Australian National Data Service as well. So identifying authors, what do we really mean by this? Well, it really does depend who you ask. We were talking on Twitter about this yesterday, and different people have a very different idea about what an author identifier is, what it's for, what they look like, which ones to use, and how many they've even got. We've got identifier types can range. We've got institution-specific identifiers, we've got ones that are specific to disciplines. So if you're in higher physics, for example, you're probably publishing on arXiv. If you're in economics, you're probably publishing on RepEc. And they've both got identifiers which they use to disambiguate names. There's funder-specific ones, so Wellcome Trust might give you an identifier. Vendor-specific, so we've got things like Researcher ID, Scopus IDs. And when I asked, I think it was Lucas replied that he had 10 identifiers on Twitter yesterday. But as soon as you point out, well, what about this one? And suddenly it's like, oh, that actually could be an identifier. So something like LinkedIn, for example, not often really thought of as an identifier, but they do offer identity services. There's quite a few academics who keep their full publisher profile in LinkedIn, and it's a persistent identifier, so it really does count in this landscape. So, in the wild, I've got 2 computers here, brilliant. In the wild, Lucas was an example I talked to yesterday, but when we've been doing these things, we've just been picking people at random to see the kind of things, to get a feel for the landscape. And I've got a random chemistry professor. This guy's, I hope he doesn't mind me picking on him. He's not in the room, I imagine, but I'm sure he doesn't mind, and I'm not picking on him. He's just a real random example and quite typical of the space. So this is chemistry. Oh, yes, we do want to continue. We really do want to continue. Okay. So this guy, he's a chemistry professor, Tony James. I mean, imagine you're quite familiar with how this might work. But if you look down the right-hand side of this little window here, he's got an awful lot of identifiers and profiles down the side. So we've got Research ID, Scholar, Mendeley, all these different things. But in other kind of more less academically focused things like Amazon, LinkedIn, and all these academic social networks as well, which provide profiles and identifier systems in a lot of cases. I don't know if you noticed, but I'm supposed to be talking about ORCiD, but he didn't have an ORCiD on his page there. He didn't list it. He has got one, I looked it up, so he's actually gone through the trouble of going to create one, and he's populated fully as well. But it's just another thing for him. He's already got 10 on there, I think. He's also got an ISNI. He might not even know he's got an ISNI. An ISNI is an International Standard Name Identifier. He's got Scopus ID, that's not on there. And he's got a page on bath.ac.uk website as well, which lists all its publications. And it's a persistent user ID as well. So, like I said, I'm not just picking on him, he's a regular example, and I'm trying to illustrate just how complex this environment is. A lot of the complexity comes from the fact that there's a confusion in academic identifier space about what's an identifier and what's a profile. When we talk about identifiers in this room, a lot of us work in IT, or we're librarians, or things like this. When we think about identifiers, we think about uniquely identifying a thing, disambiguating, so saying this is definitely, this Tony James is definitely that Tony James. And we can share it between systems. And then our systems know, and they can reconcile the differences between things. Whereas a profile, well, it can mean quite a lot of different things. So, profiles are designed to solve different use cases depending on where the profile is. So you've got profiles in things like Amazon, and that profile is very simple. It just contains its book, its published outputs you can buy on Amazon. But then you've got things like LinkedIn, you've got ResearchGate, academia.edu, you've got Scopus, you've got, I don't know, web science type things, and they all sit around, including ORCiD, and they all show ever so slightly different use cases. They're not the same thing. A list of publications is not the same as an identifier, and we've got a problem here where we conflate the two quite often. This is just another aspect of the different use cases, things to try and solve. But there are plenty of systems out there that will automatically generate your profile, whether you like it or not. So ISNI, for example, you've probably got an ISNI. If you've ever published a book, and that book has an ISBN, you've probably got an ISNI, or if you're in Via, you'll have an ISNI. If you publish a journal article, you'll have a Google Scholar profile. Scopus will automatically pick up your things and assign you a Scopus ID, and this is beyond your control. When you start at university, they'll give you a profile. Other things are manual, they're user-driven. So things like ORCiD, you go and sign up, and then optionally you populate your profile. And the same thing happens with things like LinkedIn, ResearchGate, and things like that. The reason I bring this up is poor Tony James, I just illustrated there, has to type in an awful lot of stuff, not just twice, more like 5, 6 times. And it looks like he does that. Because it's important to his academic career, I guess, to make sure that all his profiles are up to date and match. But I can imagine it's not something he particularly enjoys doing. Other problems, well, not problems, challenges when we're talking about identifiers, is the conflict of use cases and notions of what identifiers are between the institutions such as libraries, universities, publishers, funders even, and the users themselves. When you talk to users about their academic profile or their identifier, they're talking about things like dissemination, collaboration, promotion, those kind of things. When you talk about institutions, they're talking about tracking their output in terms of impact, which of course users are interested in as well, but they're interested in fitting things into their system so everything fits in a neat little box and they can reference them all around, which makes a lot of sense. There's no belittling that, that's really, really important, but what I'm trying to say is they have very different ideas about what an identifier is and for, and the profiles attached to them. And one of the main problems we have is the conflicting notion of control. So you talk to a user and they say, who should manage your outputs? And they'll go, well, I should. I want to be in charge of that profile. I want to be able to go and edit it. And you talk to a librarian and they're like, well, we need some kind of trust, some level of trust, who's asserting this, who's proving that you've written these books or journal articles. And we want to be in charge of that, we want to curate it. So this is something that's very difficult to reconcile because they're coming from completely opposite direction. And it's very difficult to have one profile that two different people can have full control over because you're bound to hit conflicts. Now, everyone in the room is familiar with this problem. John Brown here, when you look at a citation, depending on the citation format, you've got an awful lot of different ways of writing John Brown. If you're in the business of automatically parsing these things out, which I imagine some of us are, it's a real nightmare. It can be a real pain to get these to work and to get them work accurately. So there's now 5 John Browns in ORCiD, which is brilliant because it means those John Browns can say, I'm definitely this John Brown, not that John Brown. And if their ORCiDs end up somehow in citations, or at least referenced by citations, or their digital objects that are associated with them, then instead of us having to write horrible software that goes off and tries to work out which John Brown that is, when we're looking at a citation list at the end of the document, we can just pull them out and we know who they are, and that'd be fantastic. I mean, John Brown himself is even more problems here because, well, he's got a colour. So if you're thinking about, we were talking about search earlier, and the problem of having a single search box and users expecting that how to search to work. But if you type John Brown in, you're going to get people called John Brown, but you're also going to get documents about things that are Brown. If you've got an ORCiD or any other identifier, you can usually just pull them up. So, I felt the need to put this in. I probably shouldn't have bothered, but again, I'm sure everyone's familiar with this little cartoon. And it comes up a lot. I've worked in academic IT for 15 years, and this happens an awful lot. I mean, people go, well, my use case is slightly different, I'm going to make something new. And I think there's been some mention of this in the kind of identity, well, identifier rather than identity space. You know, why are you making another one? And I think one of the things that's important to think about here is those use cases I talked about, people are going to want a LinkedIn profile. They do want a Google Scholar thing, because that's where a lot of the time where people first go. So they feel the need to be on there. That use case isn't going to go away. We can't create one profile to rule them all, one identifier system to rule them all. I don't think this is going to work, because you can't just turn around and tell people to stop using something. But equally, they don't want to fill in your new thing, because it's 2 things. Or 14, which I think 14 is actually quite a good number given the examples I was showing you earlier. So I think what we really need here, rather than many identifiers and profiles, is you need one identifier that links to many profiles. And those profiles can solve these different use cases. So they can solve the use case of a librarian who wants an authoritative source via something like an ISNI. They can solve the use case where people want to be able to go off and create an identifier on the fly because they don't have one, but they need to put something into a form. And then, let's say, put something in the form, they can't sign up for it. So it solves, ORCiD will solve that kind of use case. It will solve the use case where people go, I want to manage my own profile, and librarians can curate that profile. The people at Bath University, can manage their academic profile on their pages, and all these things could be done, and then you have one identifier that's essentially a hub and spoke kind of model, links out to that. And I think ORCiD could be used to address this kind of model. So, I don't know, I've been talking about ORCiD, but I don't know how familiar people are with ORCiD. So, who's heard of ORCiD? Right. Not everyone. Okay, that's interesting. And who's got one? Less people. Okay. Now, ORCiD, you know what, I don't know what it stands for. Open something, I imagine. It's meant to be a kind of more open identifier system. It's meant to be an identifier system that has a large, wide-ranged community kind of buy-in. And it's managed that. It's funded from people with very different use cases and requirements. So it's funded by publishers, not just one, but several competing publishers are putting money into ORCiD. It's funded by universities. Funders are interested in it as well. And libraries. British Library is an ORCiD member, for example. So all these people with these conflicting use cases have finally seemed to be sitting around the table and agreeing on at least a way forward for this, which is fantastic. And I can't stand up and say this will solve everyone's problems. What I can say is at least everyone's on the same page. And when you're trying to get a system that everyone will use together, then you need a big buy-in. And what this has got is a big buy-in. Portugal, for example, just gave an ORCiD to everyone, all their academic researchers in the entire country. So Portugal's definitely on board. And there's plenty of universities that are doing the same. I was in a Vivo workshop earlier, and I think Texas A&M are thinking about giving ORCiDs to all their researchers, and this is happening in lots of places. There's rumblings about I don't want an identifier, and I can understand these kind of rumblings. But what we'd really like is to be able to say, what's your ORCiD, and he will give them to you, and then your systems will all be able to talk to each other, and we'll be able to do things like link people with the things people make. Who's familiar with the DOI system? Who's heard of DOIs? Right, DOI is a digital object identifier. Now this is the other side of the equation. This identifies things people make. So this has been around for quite some time. All the major journal providers, when they publish an article, they give it a DOI. That is just a number. But you can take that number and you can get metadata from it extremely easy. So you can say, here's a DOI, and it will give you back the metadata in an extremely easy format. Or it will give you back the thing itself, or at least the abstract if it's paywalled. So you can say, here's my DOI, and it will go, this is the title. This is the publisher. This is when it's published. This is the journal it's published in. These are the authors. Which is fantastic. But what it doesn't do is give you back proper author identifiers. It gives you back names. And as we've seen, John Browner, or whatever his name was, there's 5 of those. So just getting the name isn't all that useful. And what we're trying to do is link up the identifiers for research outputs with the identifiers for people, and then we've got a lovely graph. And it's just there. It just works. And we can navigate this graph, which would be fantastic. One of the other problems we're trying to address in Odin, and one of the reasons we're focusing on data science, is the concept of data citation. Now, there's been a lot of talk, and this was mentioned in open repositories. Someone was tweeting about it yesterday or the day before. And data is meant to be shared, I think, was the quote that someone put up. One of the presenters there had been talking about. And there's an awful lot of talk about data reuse, which is fabulous. But the problem is twofold, really. One is no one cites data. Or if they do cite data, they cite it in a different way to they cite journal articles. So people write, I've been looking at longitudinal studies, and these are studies that have been going on 50 years. Oh, I've only got 5 minutes, right. And they just don't cite data, they put it in the text, but they don't cite it like you'd cite a journal article. So if you write a machine reader to go through that, it won't pick it up. So one of the problems with that is academics are feeling, well, why should I publish my data if I get no credit for it? So it's not a first-class citizen, it's a second-class citizen of academia. So we're trying to bring that up. So if we can bring up data citation, then hopefully more people will share data. Right, I'm going to quickly run through this. Ethos, just so you're aware, I've integrated ORCiD with a few things. Ethos is one of them. It's a British library service. It's not a data service, but what it does is it publishes everybody's PhD in the country. So most national libraries have got the equivalent of this. And if we don't publish it ourselves, it will link to the institutional repository that holds it. Now, I'm going to just show you how this works. And I'm just going to show you, Ethos is just an example. This application, with a couple of hours' effort, could be made to work with pretty much any repository you like. So I'm going to try the live demo, and we'll see if that works. Now, all this software is open source. It's stuck on GitHub. So if you wanted to make it work with your ePrints or DSpace repository, so people can claim things and put them in their ORCiD profile, you can. And I'm even quite happy to walk people through or write them for them, if that's what it takes. This fantastically isn't opening. Brilliant. So the curse of the live demo has already reared its ugly head. So this is super easy. It's super easy to work with, but it's also super easy to implement. It's on Google App Engine, so it doesn't even cost anything to put it on the internet. So we can go off to Ethos, which I don't know if you're aware of this service. It's fantastic. You can get pretty much any thesis you like, and they'll digitise them on demand as well. So I don't know what we should search for. My fiancée suggested apples yesterday. So. People have pretty much written a PhD on everything. So all these PhDs have identifiers, they're not DOIs. but this is something we're definitely looking into. They might have a DIY already, in which case we'll find it. So the application goes off to Ethos, which is just a regular web page with embedded metadata in the HTML. And we can go off to ORCiD and push it into our ORCiD record. So hopefully. But the reason I'm doing this live is simply to show you how easy this kind of thing is, so that people can just take stuff from your institutional repositories and put it on their profiles really, really easy. So all I've got to do is authorise the application. So as Tom Demeranville, I'm going to say that this Ethos application is allowed to write to my profile. And now it's found out my ORCiD. It's also got the metadata for the document, the PhD thesis, and I've got to update my profile. It's really that simple. And it's done. There we go. So we can go and have a look. And for those of you that aren't familiar with ORCiD, now come and see. This is what ORCiD looks like. It's not the prettiest website, but it's definitely functional. And as you can see, I've got a whole bunch of things here. Let's see if we can find the Apple one. I have been doing a lot of testing with these kind of things. So as you can see, it's not only gone off and got the title, I don't know if you can see here, it's gone off and got a full bid text citation, publication date, other identifiers, and links back to the original document. Now, if you do this with data sets, that's brilliant. It totally works. You can give it type information and things. And then one of the brilliant things about this is, as you do this, you can actually use it to enrich your own metadata. Where are I? So yeah, we can actually go back and somehow, why does it look different on PC? Right. And you can go back and you can enrich your own metadata. So I managed to fit Tadara in the slide down. Yeah, there we go. All right, and we can get the virtuous circle. So what we can do is we can use it to enrich our own metadata. So as a data center or something like that, you can go off and you can query ORCiD and pull back all the people that have got your things. And you can work out, if you don't have that kind of metadata yourself, you can find out the ORCiDs from them. And then you've got bi-directional links, which is just fantastic. You can start putting them on your pages. So when people visit a data set, they don't see the data set, they see the ORCiD that's ID that's associated with it. And they can go off and see the other data sets that person's published, or the other journal articles they've published. And what we're creating is a nice non-RDF, but definite linked set of data. Now Dryad do this, for example, on Science Direct, and probably other websites. Dryad is a data repository of data sets. When you publish an article, you can publish the data with Dryad, it links them two together on Dryad. Someone like Science Direct can then go, when they show you an abstract, they'll then ping Dryad and say, Dryad, have you got any data sets that are associated with this? And ding, yes, if it has, it'll come back. So now you can see the article and the data set associated with it in the same place. As we go forward, Dryad will be able to say, well, we've also got the ORCiD for that. So then you'll see the journal article, you'll see their Dryad data sets, and you'll see the ORCiD, which will show you all their other work. And from there you can find their collaborators, you can find related data sets. And it's just fantastic, and what we've got to do is if we can all agree to use just one identifier system to do this, then everyone only has to keep updating one other place, which would just be fantastic. I don't know if this is wise, but I'm just going to show you the other part of this. And this is just, I've written an API on top of the ORCiD API. And this is just it's stuck in the same place at the moment. But just to give you an example, I don't know if any of you work with data centers. Does anyone work in a data center? No, brilliant. Okay. Probably not the intended audience. All right. But what you can do is you can reverse look up, so you can find all the people that are, like I was just explaining, that have claimed things from your thing. But you can also do it for publishers, so you can find out who's published something with. There's a lovely journal called the American Helicopter Society. I didn't know. But yeah, there's lots of people in ORCiD that have claimed things from there. So you can see who is publishing where. And this stuff is all just there. And these APIs are extremely easy to work with. I'd better start wrapping up, I think. But yeah, if you want to input it yourself, the GitHub address is there. It's on my Twitter feed, I think, somewhere as well. It's super easy. I honestly promise you, if you know anything about Java at all, you could do this in a couple of hours. If it works with, if you've got something like ePrints, I've already written one that works with certain ePrints repositories, doesn't work with them all, but I was just hacking around. But it can work with your library systems as well. Anything you publish on your website, people can claim that. So if you're putting up conference proceedings, for example, and you're running a conference, you could have a thing that says push this into my ORCiD record, and so the person that's got it can then go along, click it, and boff, it's in their ORCiD record. And it would take you about 10 minutes is an exaggeration, but it really doesn't take long. There's also a Java library I've written that works. There's libraries that other people have written for all these other different languages. And you can just roll your own against their API. Their API is super simple. I'll skip over this. So I'm just going to say thanks for having a listen. If you've got any questions about ORCiD data site or any of these things I've been talking about today, then please come and chat to me.
Thank you, Tom. Is there any question about ORCiD? Yeah.
You say there's an API into the ORCiD set. Is there a dereferenceable URI for every ORCiD ID that returns some linked data that you can consume without having to use the API?
I can honestly say no, there isn't.
Oh.
I know. Well, I have mentioned this to ORCiD themselves. I don't work for ORCiD, by the way, just to let you know. And I've said exactly that. I said, why can't you just get RDF straight back from it? As of last time I looked, they didn't do it.
Who do we lobby?
You lobby ORCiD themselves.
Okay.
But I know, just to make it sound a bit better, is I know that it's definitely on their roadmap, and they realise it's a shortcoming. The API returns their own kind of, they've got their own JSON and XML type markups, which are perfectly functional, but they're not RDF. And it's definitely on the roadmap because everything they want to incorporate with uses RDF. So I think that's. But one of the things that they've done is because their APIs, I realise that RDF is very important, but because their API is so simple, you can write one in JavaScript. You know? So whereas that's a bit harder with RDF, maybe. So what it's meant is people aren't really using it, but it's definitely a shortcoming for anything, you know, industrial strength, and you're going to need the RDF.
Is there any other questions? Yeah, I mean, for me, so I think it's quite interesting, the application you have built, but I'm wondering, you said like the researcher, they don't even know they have an ORCiD, so I guess to be really useful, those kind of services need to be used by people, and people need to be aware of what is the usefulness of ORCiD.
Absolutely.
So I was wondering what could be done to kind of generate awareness about that.
Absolutely. I think there's a little bit of confusion there because people are aware they've got an ORCiD. Because to get an ORCiD, you have to claim it yourself. So it's a user-driven thing. But other identifiers like ISNI, definitely, they're not aware they've got an ISNI. And there's been a lot of work done. There's loads of these ORCiD kind of advocates going around screaming from the rooftops, trying to get everyone to adopt these things. And I think a lot of the friction is because people are looking at it as if it's yet another profile. They're like, why should I fill this in? I've already filled it in everywhere else. No one's looking at it. And I think this is part of the confusion. I think this is a problem ORCiD have, and I think it's a mistake they've made. So like I said, I don't work for ORCiD, so I'm not 100% saying everything they do is brilliant. I think the mistake they've made is including any kind of profile information within ORCiD at all. I think it should purely be an identifier system that links out to other profiles. So they don't have to manage it within ORCiD, and then it's not a problem for them. They don't have to even worry about it. All they need to know is they've got one and this is the number.
So do you think libraries would have kind of a role, like the university libraries would have also a role in trying to generate awareness about that? Because I guess it's really useful, those kind of services are also really useful for libraries.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, ORCiD is just trying to address this kind of hybrid thing where it's trying to address, again, it's trying to address user needs and institution needs. But institutions as members can mint ORCiDs for their users. But the users have to claim it. So as an institution, you can go through your directory and go make an ORCiD for all these people. And then it emails all those people a little thing saying, please sign up for an ORCiD, click this button. And it really is a 2-minute thing. You click the button and it works. You put in your name, done. But only, you know, people don't click through. They don't see the value of it, and this is a very valid question. Why should I get one? And I think, and this is, when I first came to this project, my first initial reaction was, well, the only way to make people do it is to tell them they have to. And this does seem to be the realisation. If you give them a business reason to do it, they will do it. So this is happening. Some publishers are now saying, not that you need an ORCID, but it's definitely, it's there on the form. And they're going to get to the point where they're going to say, you must give me an ORCID or an ELAG. Funders are starting to say similar kind of things. Depositing data in data repositories are getting to it. But they're really scared of making these things mandatory because people will stop using their services. So what we've got is a lot of momentum towards this, but we haven't quite reached a tipping point where these things have become ubiquitous. But I think out of all the identified systems I've looked at, this is the one that has the potential to do it. And the reason that I think it's a good one is because of its broad base of appeal, and no one particular publisher or kind of use case is dominating it.
Well, thank you again.